Ya, selamat pagi and สวัสดีครับทุกคนยินดีมากที่อยู่ที่นี่วันนี้ at the Faculty of sorry, Liberal Arts here at Princess of Narathiwat University. Let me start with a big thank you to the university and especially the Faculty of Liberal Arts, the fantastic deans and associate deans, as well as our brilliant moderators, as well as the whole organizing team. I do know how much work it is to bring together such a conference, because also our school, we organized a couple of similar events in recent years. All right, so without further ado, let me kick off the conference with with my keynote topic for today, which tries to bringing together three key terms. Let's try to move on to the next slide. Exactly. Which are tourism, multiculturalism, and resilience. And without going too deep into the definitions of these terms, which to some extent are also quite contested, whether we look from it from a sociological or a managerial perspective, right? We are all familiar with the term tourism, which broadly speaking refers to people who travel outside of their very own environment, outside of their homes, be it like many of us today for educational or for academic purposes, or as many tourists come for Thailand for leisure, right? Or other purposes. Again, these movements may be domestically within the country, or they may be regionally or internationally. But the important fact, and this clearly links up to the next term on multiculturalism, is the tourism, probably more than any other industry, is bringing together people of different backgrounds, people who speak different languages, who may have a different socioeconomic status, who have different religions and cultures, right? So in this way, tourism and multiculturalism may, and we will look at some examples later on, go together in a very mutual beneficial way. But we also need to talk about resilience. And at the opening, a few colleagues mentioned the words recovery, tourism recovery, right? Resilience as a concept is really referring to people's ability, how to respond to, how to come back from crisis situations. And of course, we maybe all suffered a lot during COVID-19, but this, of course, by far is not the only kind of crisis. The tourism industry, as well as the people who are involved in it, need to return from. So I would like to position this discussion further within the regional context of Southeast Asia. A region I started to love since I am a young child. Many years ago, I think I was 8 or 9 years old, I had my very first trip with my parents to Indonesia. And from that time on, the smell, the people, the landscapes, the food, everything. I always wanted to work and study in about the region of Southeast Asia. Later on, one of my regional focus areas as part of my geography studies became Thailand. So if we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. Here we are. So Southeast Asia, right? We mentioned this term for the region already a few times today. And it's quite interesting if we look at the existing literature. It shows how difficult it actually is to define what is Southeast Asia characterized by. Indeed, 50 years ago, one famous scholar called Ginsberg mentioned, well, I hardly can imagine any, back please, yes, any region which is more fragmented, which is more diverse than Southeast Asia, prompting another scholar asking, does Southeast Asia actually exist? Because of the difficulties of really finding what unifies the region. So maybe the answer lies in its diversity. Maybe Southeast Asia and what unifies Southeast Asia, it is the diversity on many different levels. First, let's look briefly into some of the geographical dimensions, right? We may distinguish mainland Southeast Asia, where we are here in Thailand, plus neighboring countries, from the insular part of Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia. We may further distinguish those countries that have access to the sea, and these are all of them, no, almost all of them, except Laos, right? Laos PDR is the only landlocked country. But access to the sea, maritime areas is another similarity they share. Then in all countries, we find the distinctions between highlands and lowlands, right? And this geographical distinction has very important implications also for agriculture, also for economy. If you think about highland and rice versus paddy rice in the delta areas. And then I mentioned here geographical fringes. What I mean hereby is we may have regions in Asia which are politically not part of Southeast Asia. However, culturally, geographically, linguistically, they are very, very close. Think about Sipsongpanna in the southwest of China. Think about the northeastern part of India, right? Close to Burma land. These are Tibeto-Burmese languages also found in the north of Thailand.
อันนี้คือ
Then what about political?
อันนี้เราเข้าในนี้เหรอ
Right? As we know, Thailand is the only country which was not formally colonized. However, most countries do share some form of colonial experience. We don't go into all these details now, but that's certainly another shared characteristics. And then we have the consortium of ASEAN, of Southeast Asian nations, right? With Timor-Leste as an additional partner to join now as well. However, political systems across the region do differ significantly. And also economically, I would state that Southeast Asia is very diverse, including countries which score very high on the economic and socio-economic development indicators. Think about Singapore, for example. But on the other hand, we also have countries which are listed at the United Nations list of the so-called least developed countries. So there is a lot of diversity geographically, politically, and economically, but of course also at cultural levels. Religious diversity, if we think about Southeast Asia, right? Almost all the main religions are represented. Of course, in terms of numbers, think about Indonesia, think about Malaysia, parts of Thailand, right? Muslims do represent the largest share of population in Southeast Asia, right? And we have Buddhism in most parts of mainland Southeast Asia, Christianity quite strongly in the Philippines, but also islands of Hinduism, right? This picture was taken, any idea where this picture was taken? Bali, I heard it already, exactly, right? But the influence from India can also be seen in many other countries, right? In most of the Buddhist temples in Thailand, if you look closely, you do find some architectural features where the influences are quite clear. Or also how Buddhism, right, first arrived in the region. So there are historical and contemporary connections very important ones to other parts of the world, including India, including China. And there's a very, very rich ethnic and linguistic diversity across the region. Right? Languages, I think the linguists here are the experts on languages. And there may be arguments, but I think we have more than 1,000 languages in the region, which is a very stunning fact and a very strong evidence of the diversity which has been mentioned earlier. Right? So in addition to these historical and cultural connections, we also have more recent dynamics of mobility. This is where on the one hand, more current forms of labor migration come into place, right? Think about the international workers in the hospitality industry or in manufacturing, right? As an example, but also in the context of tourism, particularly international tourism. And Thailand indeed is one of the most visited countries worldwide, which brings along many opportunities, but also challenges. So let's talk about tourism and tourism development in Southeast Asia next. What we see here on this graph is development of tourism in the region over the last 3 decades, just until COVID-19 turned the world and tourism upside down. We see here in this graph that in the 1990s, tourism in the region really kicked off. Why? Many countries, especially in mainland Southeast Asia, started to open up politically and also opened up their doors for international tourism. Thailand and Malaysia, that time, were already well ahead of the other countries in Southeast Asia. But then you see from the 2000s onward, we see that Malaysia and Thailand in particular experienced quite sharp increases. This has many different reasons. One of them is was the strong increase of Asian tourism, and a bit later on, particularly from China. So just before COVID-19, Thailand counted almost 40 million international tourist arrivals in Southeast Asia. By far, Southeast Asia's #1 country in reference to international tourist arrivals. What happened? Right? We all remember January, February, March 2022, right? Announcements were made throughout the world. Borders were suddenly closed. I myself was affected. I was in the middle of a travel, and know many other colleagues and friends have been too. So the unthinkable happened. Almost within days, international tourism was shut down, not to zero. People still traveled, but almost to zero, which continued also in 2021. Is it new for Southeast Asia and particularly for Thailand to deal with crisis? Certainly not. And we do not have time to go through all these crises which Thailand experienced over the last 2 decades. But the point I want to make here, despite political crisis, natural disasters, human-made disasters, even bombings and other areas, Thailand always bounced back quite significantly. And as you can see, tourism was interrupted several times throughout these decades, but it never reached that extreme point of low as we see here in this chart in 2020 and 2021. So in other words, the COVID-19 pandemic really represents an unprecedented type of crisis that stopped these forms of mobility in a very, very drastic sense. So while we would like to say that every crisis maybe also brings along opportunities. So in many ways, COVID-19, at least temporarily, shut down the hospitality and tourism experience and industry as we knew it. I'm sure you all remember when we were locked down in our houses, right? Social distances, social distancing still took place. And then it were countries in Europe and partly in the Middle East who started first to reopen again. In Southeast Asia, Thailand and particularly Phuket was a pioneer. You remember the notion of the Phuket sandbox, right? Of course, there were problems and issues and regulations changed and so forth. Nevertheless, was the first destination, right, in Southeast Asia that really opened up again. What we see now, first, second quarter 2023, is that international tourism is coming back very strongly, right? Most recently, January, February this year, also China opened up again for their outbound tourism markets, right? Which have been so crucial in previous years for most countries in Southeast Asia. So we do hope that we learn from mistakes in the past. And as I said before, every crisis has an opportunity. And maybe the COVID-19 crisis offers the opportunity to reshape tourism and hospitality in a more sustainable, right? In a more meaningful way for its host, guest, and intercultural encounter. And in this context, I would further like to talk about several of these aspects, and I will be starting with the role of culture and diversity in tourism. Studies have shown that the post-COVID-19 tourist developed a quest for more localized, for more authentic type of experiences. The argument is that because of these lockdown experiences where social contact and interaction was very limited, there's now a stronger need, a stronger desire to reconnect again, right? So if we think about, many types of tourism, culture and diversity play such an important role. Think about religious inspired forms of tourism, like pilgrimage, for example. Think about historical tourism. Think about heritage tourism, right? Think about food, right? Everything can be connected and related to cultural elements, which make up a very important part of the tourist experience. One question, which is not that easy to answer, is, does tourism have the power to bring people together and to increase cross-cultural understanding between groups of different cultural, linguistic, or socio-economic backgrounds? The slide I'm showing you here is the positive perspective. Some say it is a bit naive, but we do find evidence that the direct interaction between people from different cultures, from different regions, can bring them together and can help increasing that they do understand each other better, that they may challenge their stereotypes, and they do learn from each other through cultural exchange. Of course, such forms of tourism as ecotourism or other forms of sustainable tourism also have educational aspects embedded, right? Which is different from, some very quick mass tourism arranged types of traveling. So these benefits are possible and they should be supported. However, we do know very well from other examples that tourism can also go and develop into a bad way, right? I just included a few examples here. One couple of years ago in Malaysia, when tourists from Europe, in that example, climbed the Kota Kinabalu, right? And mountains in Sabah. And it was quite big on the media because they were so happy that they finally reached the peak, They completely stripped, got naked, and that way offended a lot of people. Right? They were even arrested just for a few days. They were released soon after. But it's just an example how being uninformed, right, can lead to such conflicts between tourists and residents and local authorities. And this is not a singular case. I know there were similar cases in Thailand, in Cambodia, and many other countries and areas around the world. Okay, the other photo you see here is not from Southeast Asia. It's from Southern Europe. Very famous beach destination. It's called Benidorm in the south of Spain. I don't know. Would you like to make holiday at a place like that? Right? It's too crowded. That's one issue. And the other one, you see, first row of beachside full of high-rise building. That started as early in the 1960s and 70s when mass tourism started, right? And, lots of interest of developers to make quick money, and local communities have not been consulted in the overall developing process. And once you have such a beach skyline, it's very difficult to reverse such situations. What else we have? You see the photo on the left. It's an aerial photo of what I like to call tourist enclaves. In this case, it's in the Middle East, but it could be somewhere else as well. You see there's one resort after another, and no opportunities for small businesses to benefit from tourism, right? This is a form of tourism where lots of revenue, a lot of money is being made, but only very little is really trickling down to local communities and smaller businesses. So if the benefits of tourism are not shared evenly, right? If there's a strong inequality, then this can also lead to anti-tourist sentiments. Before COVID-19, we heard the terms of over-tourism, right? Which started in Europe, in cities such as Barcelona, Venice, as you can see the photos here, where local community feels there's no space for them, they are not welcome, their prices for rent are increasing, they do not see and experience benefits of tourism. Then the mood can really swing and develop into anti-tourist movements. Another cultural issue that has been debated quite intensively, both in theory and practice, is the one related to commodification of culture, right? Turning culture, be it in the form of a service, of a relationship between human beings, of a traditional practice, of goods, of cultural products, into a commodity, into something where the main interest is not the cultural value, but the economic gain. So we may say, well, who cares, right? We need to understand everyone would like to make money, right? So that's the one perspective, making economic gains. But on the other hand, what is the remaining value if the culture, the practice, the religion becomes meaningless? Right? In Thailand, for example, Buddha figures are a very popular souvenir, especially among Western tourists. And you may be shocked in some European shopping malls, you find Buddha heads between shoes, right? In a shoe shop, just because they are not aware of the cultural meaning of the symbol. And there are many similar examples that we could probably share on this issue. So you see, it can be a quite tricky and difficult balance. On the one hand, wanting, for very good reasons, the economic gains, right, of tourism through culture, versus the dangerous development of a culture to become meaningless in such commodification processes. Sometimes, that's why I'm showing these photos, these commodification processes are strongly linked to the so-called developing South. But we have very similar processes also in Europe. And indeed, most of these photos you see here are from my home region. Just would like to highlight the photo on the bottom on the left. If you can move the mouse a bit so we can clearly see it, because the link is blocking it. Or if we cannot, it's okay. So what you see here is a village in the mountain region of Tyrol, and there are a lot of tourists around, and there are lots of cows, cattle, right? Some decorated with flowers. So what is happening in this region, right? So when before the winter starts in late autumn, October usually, the farmers, the highland farmers, have to bring the cows down from the highland to the lowland valley, because up on the mountain it would get too cold for them. So that's a very important process and has become a big tradition, which is also celebrated by the local community. So this tradition attracted more and more tourists in a village in Tyrol, in Austria, and suddenly communities say, well, okay, there's an additional way, right, to make money with this event. So what they did, they brought the cows down, and next week they brought them up again and just reorganized the whole event for tourism purposes. Yeah, and another big concept is the one of authenticity, right? I said earlier on, tourists are looking for authentic experience. Sometimes I feel it's a very complicated term. What does it actually mean? Indeed, some researchers suggested use a much simpler word. Say the real, the true, the genuine thing. But academics say, it's not that easy, right? So that's why we also have a theorization, conceptualization of authenticity. And let me just briefly introduce the three types of authenticity according to one. The first one is, can we have an objective authenticity? Can we measure whether something is real, something is original in an absolute sense or not? Take the example of Mona Lisa, right? We have an original and a reproduction. Well, I could probably not tell you, but if we find an expert in fine arts for that particular type of art, he or she would probably be able to tell us. And probably we'd believe him because this person is the expert and can tell us, is it authentic, yes or not? Okay, one way to see it. Second one, constructive authenticity. It doesn't matter what the expert says. If I buy a replica, a cheap one, for a few thousand baht, right, at the night bazaar, and I'm happy with it, it is good enough for me. I feel it's authentic to me, and what others say or how others experience it does not matter, right? The same if you go to a church or to a Buddhist temple, you have a very different experience whether you are believe in this particular religion or not, right? But for both the believer and the non-believer, it may be an authentic one, depending on his or her personal backgrounds. And the last one is the existential authenticity. Here it is really becoming part of the experience, right? To not only come and observe, for instance, a cultural dance, music performance, but to be part of it, to join the band, to join the dance and actively participate it. This is closely linked to the concepts of experiential tourism. Time-wise, we still have about... Okay, wonderful. So lots of existing studies tell us that authenticity, or the quest for authenticity, is important for tourists. But we also see more and more studies that start to question this very cultural motivation. And I would like to share a personal story of mine and link it to the question whether tourists are really looking for authentic experiences. So more than 10 years ago, I went to northern Laos. It was the area of Vieng Phuket, which that time didn't see many international tourists, but it was well known for its highlands, its forests, and its indigenous groups. So we found a small local travel agency which is arranging treks into the area, and we booked a 2 days trekking tour, including a visit and overnight stay in one of the villages. So we asked beforehand, okay, how long is the trip? You know, what is included and so forth. And they said, yeah, 6 hours of trekking. That time I thought 6 hours, no problem. Still okay, borderline for me, but okay. And he said, you have to cross 3 rivers. Said, okay, 3 rivers, we will somehow make it, and you will stay overnight in a local village. They have a guest house for you to stay. Wonderful. Then we started the trip. And while, yes, it was true, we crossed 3 rivers, but we crossed each river at least 2 times. So we had more than 6 river crossings. And maybe you make it in 6 hours, you know, if you're physically very fit and if you're used to that type of hiking in the tropical mountains, but not for us Europeans. So indeed for us, it took us 12 hours and we arrived quite late in the evening in the village. Then once we arrived at the village, got some wonderful local food. It was in many ways a unique experience. Then we asked about the toilet, and they said, yeah, go to the forest, which was not an issue for the small business. But then the next morning, right, the bigger business, if you know what I mean, was approaching. So I said, I'm sorry, I have to go to the toilet. Right, and Cosita, who was there as well, told me, don't forget your bamboo stick, the one I'm holding here on that picture. And I thought, yes, the floor is slippery, so better bring a stick. But then, you know, when it was about time for the business, I quickly understood what I need the bamboo stick for, because as soon as I started, a lot of black pigs, right, were approaching me and, you know, trying to directly feed from me, which was indeed a very unique and unusual experience. None of this was shared beforehand, right, from the travel agency. And I doubt that most of international tourists would be ready for such experiences. So what we see in more recent studies is that tourists say, yes, I would like to have the real, the genuine experience. But in fact, most of them do not. So what they want and what they in fact get is what McCannell already many years ago called a staged authenticity. Tourists say, yes, we want the full cultural experience, but in fact, they cannot handle it. So what happened is a kind of cultural stage, right, is being set up where tourists may have the impression this is the real cultural experience, but in the end, it is prepared, it is set up, it is staged like in a theater for tourists. One more short story about Nan province, right? Nam province in Thailand, you maybe heard about the Mlabri or Pitong Luang, the spirits of the yellow leaves. This name was given by an Austrian anthropologist, by the way, because he observed the time whenever the group is leaving, right? Their houses, the temporary leaves are turning yellow. That's why he that time provided that name. Anyway, they are known as a hunter-gatherer group. So a colleague and friend of mine, couple of years ago, she went to Nan province and met a tour guide who said, yes, you probably heard about the Pitong Luang, very interesting group. If you want, I can organize a trekking tour, very exclusive, very special. I cannot guarantee that we find the group, but we may have a good chance. So next day, they started the trekking tour. And after half an hour, they had this encounter after half an hour walking, right? And even for them, the tourists, they were not sure. This is strange. On the one hand, it looks real, it looks authentic. But on the other hand, I'm not sure. Maybe there was a setup. Maybe it was a type of staged authenticity. So a year later, I met my colleague and friend, Ajahn Prasid from Chiang Mai University, who is from Nam province. And I told him this story, and he was laughing and saying, yeah, this is a quite popular tourist setup to sell this type of experiences. Right. So, authenticity, very prominent concept in cultural and ethnic tourism. Yet, I think we have to see the concept critically. It also has other problematic implications, I would say, because in some ways it further pushes, right, commodification of cultures and may represent a quite wrong image of local communities or other aspects of culture. Yeah, so in addition to these cultural aspects, let me highlight a few more areas, just briefly. I know we don't have a lot of time left, towards opportunities and challenges in a potential post-COVID-19 time, as Southeast Asia and other regions of the world are recovering from tourism, right? As you're probably aware, the UN has a large agreement on achieving 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And indeed, not only Southeast Asia, the whole Asia-Pacific region is not on track for various reasons. So there's a lot to do, and also tourism can contribute to further develop and focus on sustainable tourism practices. Very interesting examples in Southeast Asia we've seen from closed tourist destinations, not only through COVID-19, but also beforehand. I'm sure you all heard about the closing of Maya Bay, right, in the south of Thailand, or Boracay Island in the Philippines, which was completely closed for a period of 6 months because of the many negative, especially environmental effects. And what we've seen is, yes, if you treat a destination and the natural environment in a more careful way, resources can recover. Right? I think this is a quite important lesson, which was also further reinforced by the COVID-19 experience. If we ask what is the most sustainable form of travel, some of my academic colleagues would say not traveling at all, because this way you don't generate any greenhouse gas emissions. And this is linked to a recent trend that just came up before COVID-19, and it's called flight shaming, right? In the past, everyone, was very proud being at the airport, selfie, posting on social media. But this has slightly changed, if you realize, because there's more consciousness, more feeling of guilt, maybe also, that with each of your travel, especially flight travel, you are part of the problem. However, is the solution not to travel, not to have any host-guest relationships, not to see your friends and families, not to make new friends around the world? Probably not, but a more balanced approach may be needed, which also requires a stricter enforcement of visitor management approaches, which may include hard approaches, including fines, strict regulations, and so-called soft approaches, which more focus on education and interpretation. And finally, maybe the growth mantra also need to be questioned. This is what the ideas and notion of degrowth tourism strategies are suggesting. Another very, very big and ongoing issue is the one on tourism and climate change or climate crisis and other related environmental impacts. I lived 4 years in the Pacific Islands, many of them very low-lying islands, right, where you really experience and feel these impacts of climate change even more stronger than at other destinations. Right? There is a lot of scientific evidence. It's very strong, and it's getting stronger year by year, that we and our actions a big, big part of the problem, and that we significantly have to change our everyday behavior in order to combat the growing climate crisis in the region. Another one is in relation to generation of waste and waste management. There are many things that can and should be done. Just one interesting example from the country of Vanuatu in the Pacific Islands. Right? If you go in Thailand or anywhere in Southeast Asia to a market and you buy 5, 6 things, you go back with 10 plastic bags. Right? Most of these places. Vanuatu, for that very reason, banned plastic bags. So how does this work? Just look at these 2 examples. Right? Instead of plastic bags, we have natural strings. We have baskets made of palm leaves or banana leaves, right? So very creative ways to come up with other packaging materials that are not based on plastic. Another maybe lesson learned and crucial point for potential future planning is the role of the locals, the local residents, the local population, right? We see here, of course, when international tourism stopped, the first type of tourism that was picking up was domestic tourism. So suddenly the domestic market came into focus again for the tourism industry. And while the average spendings are lower, right? The domestic market could not fully compensate for the lack. Nevertheless, it was so crucial to keep lots of the industry stakeholders alive. So the question is, moving on now, right? Second quarter 2023. What does this mean for the domestic market moving forward? I think there's an economic and, more importantly, a socio-cultural argument that residents, right, who live in the area should maybe receive more discounts on packages. They don't contribute to greenhouse gases, right? And at the same time, they have a stronger feeling of being part of a positive tourism experience. What about new consumer perspectives? As I mentioned before, there are 2 types of studies, right? One is telling us that the new post-COVID tourist is looking for more local and authentic and nature-based experience. But other studies show us the very opposite, that we find the type of tourists we may refer to as revenge tourists, right? These are those type of tourists who were locked down for a very long time during the COVID time. And now they feel, now finally I can travel again. Now I spend more money than before. I will fly more than ever before because I have to compensate for the lost time during the 2020 and 2021 years. Indeed, we just did a study on international tourists in Malaysia, Penang Island, and we found that safety and health concerns are not important to them anymore, but to have a hedonistic and strong consumption-based experience. Yeah. Almost coming to an end. So that's the last point, right? We can't talk about the future of tourism post-COVID-19 without mentioning technology, right? Technology adoption was already a trend before COVID-19. However, the context further accelerated this progress, right? Think about the way you pay for tourism experiences. Also at Hatyai Airport, right? There's a robot cleaning the floors. More and more restaurants have robotic services. I'm sure you all know about artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, right? Maybe in the future you will have a hologram guest keynote speaker here instead. So this is a big area which we certainly need to pay further attention to. Having said that, there are many opportunities, but there are also lots of challenges to it, especially how can more marginalized groups or small businesses benefit from such developments. Yeah, to conclude, I was trying to present Southeast Asia in many of its diverse forms. And maybe the conclusion on the region is that Southeast Asia is best characterized by its diversity. And this diversity, while it can be a challenge, and this I fully agree what the moderators were saying earlier today, it is also a great strength. Also for tourism purposes. So the diversity of Thailand, of Southeast Asia certainly contributes to its attractiveness for international tourism. Yet, as we talk about recovery and as we talk about tourism and the need to be developed more sustainable, there may also be a danger to recover too fast and too furious, right? So these new recovery developments should certainly be strongly aligned with sustainable practices. Moving forward, right, continuing focus will remain on crisis management, right, in relation to the different types of crisis we showed earlier on. I also would like to highlight again the importance of the participation of other stakeholders, especially the community, which is crucial for promoting further mutual understanding between different stakeholders. And we cannot understand the cultural elements without the environment and without the economic context, right? And final words, we also want to further diversify tourism markets. It may be problematic to rely on one market only, right? In Southeast Asia, China played such an important role, and many destinations, came quite into crisis when this market was suddenly missing. Finally, to move forward, right, and that's where education and academic institutions play such an important role. Capacity building, training is indeed needed to pave a way towards a more sustainable and effective future in tourism planning and development and resilience. So, yeah, sorry if I took a few extra minutes, but this brings me to the end of this keynote. Thank you very much, Khop Khun Khrap, and let's have further discussion.